The Agricultural Law Novice, J. Nelson for ALEC 533. Students in agricultural law will encounter case studies through the nascent stages of their university careers. One that relates to the Clean Air Act is the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation versus the Environmental Protection Agency. This would be taught within the context of the Clean Air Act. As summarized by the National Agricultural Law Center, the Act provides a comprehensive and complex regulatory framework for regulating stationary and mobile sources of air pollution. It requires that the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, to establish minimum national standards for air quality, and assigns primary responsibility for enforcement and compliance to the states. The Act also establishes a permit system for all major sources of pollution and addresses prevention of pollution in areas with clean air. The novice student here learning in this example will already have declarative, procedural, and conditional knowledge. Declarative knowledge, according to Shunk, includes facts, beliefs, opinions, generalizations, theories, hypotheses, and attitudes about oneself, others, and world events. Declarative knowledge is stored in the long-term memory with its basic facts and those facts related to it in a sort of network. So the student will read the case study, Alaska versus the EPA, and discuss it in class. They will learn that the Supreme Court decided that the EPA has the authority to override the state if the state does not adhere to the standards of the Clean Air Act. In this case, a factory finding what they considered a best available pollution control technology that did not meet requirements. That information is translated into a proposition in the mind. That proposition is linked with others that are already known. The students would have learned about the Clean Air Act, the authority and processes of Supreme Court edicts, how entities can challenge laws, and all the foundational information that would be integral in attaining such knowledge. Furthermore, students could also draw their own conclusions from this case. For example, this may show the political stances on environmental issues of the justices. The new knowledge is linked with the old in the working memory and later stored in the long-term memory. If the professor in question were to use meaningful information concisely, such as terms and legal processes studied in the class used in hierarchy, from writs of certiorari petitioning the Supreme Court to hearing the case to the actual decision, and elaboration linking information to other similar situations such as the EPA air programs, better facilitate this sort of learning. More anatomically, nodes in the brain activate other similar nodes when stimulated. So Supreme Court conjures justices, conjures powers. Likewise, mental schemas associate larger concepts. When a student thinks of the EPA, they might immediately associate it with agricultural law and how it influences food production. Procedural knowledge, according to Shunk, is knowing how to perform cognitive activities, and the brain stores them similarly to declarative knowledge networks. In the mind, there are codes and images that conjure production networks, which are decoded as certain activities producing outcomes or if-then statements. Students will first read the case study Alaska versus the EPA. They will then summarize the facts using the procedural knowledge of drawing out important information such as knowing the EPA requires best available pollutant control technology through the Clean Air Act, and highlighting that the state of Alaska went against this. So by first understanding what occurred and what that led to, the Supreme Court taking on the case and ordering that the EPA has the final say over states, students can understand the procedure of the courts more thoroughly. Students, before discussing the case in class, might be asked to write a brief. They would use procedural knowledge to do this. This would include how to organize the information, creating a document adhering to professional standards, and what information to include to make a hypothetical argument for whichever side they choose. More deeply, this would require the students taking knowledge about legal argumentation, more procedural knowledge, and applying it to this case. Declarative knowledge here is turned into something that works, so students have declaratively the standards set in place by the Clean Air Act and what occurs when federal entities break laws. The procedural knowledge is combining the two and postulating how they'd handle the legal situation as an attorney. Furthermore, this readies the student to take procedural knowledge highlighted in this case and apply it to other similar situations. Conditional knowledge, according to Shunk, is knowing when and why to apply declarative and procedural knowledge to accomplish set goals. So when reading the case, if students were to memorize that the Clean Air Act made certain provisions for water pollution, they'd be missing the point. Conditional knowledge is understanding that the Alaska versus the EPA has to do with air quality standards. So students would be able to discern information using best available air quality controllers, which the case relates. While writing briefs, students should have the conditional knowledge to pick out information that will win their argument and know what is chosen will most likely be challenged by the professor. So it would be ill-advised to just say that the state has rights, but knowing the context of the course, the student might cite Justice Scalia's argument that the state is given a certain privilege through the Clean Air Act, and if they thought the pollutant control was sufficient, it is an infringement by the EPA to suggest otherwise. This conditional knowledge of knowing what to pick out helps legitimize the student's argument in class and furthers their knowledge of legal procedure. As formerly stated, a novice learner will have the aforementioned declarative, procedural, and conditional knowledge, but will still be no expert. If you've ever spoken to a lawyer, they are usually able to, in simple terms, easily explain legal processes. They are expert, and the knowledge accrued is second nature. Experts are also more cognizant of what they don't know and have more domain knowledge. So they not only have the knowledge of this case, but several more like it. Novices still usually have to cognitively go over each legal process to make sure they don't miss or incorrectly decipher a step, pulling from limited courtroom experience. To bring a novice to expert status, first a goal must be put into place. Here it would be knowledge to petition the Supreme Court for the control of government agencies against harmful state regulations. Here, an expert, the professor that has more than likely been an attorney themselves, would take the beginnings of the case and analyze how they could meet a desired end. However, the novice would be more likely to take the end and try to match backwards. Novices should be encouraged to begin at recognizing why the Supreme Court decided to take the case to begin with, analyze the arguments and how they relate to the epistemologies of the justices, and what the final outcome means for them as agricultural lawyers. In this process, novices would probably tend to do this unorganizedly. An expert would know the meaning of the inner workings of the case well, the documents required, what procedures the lawyers would take, etc. By acquainting the novice to these, they can better structure meaning in hierarchy using their knowledge networks. For example, the state of Alaska gave this writ of certiorari because the lawyers had this defense in mind, which affected this justice this way and led to this outcome. Practice here is paramount, along with acquiring schema and structuring it to new knowledge that can be easily retrieved. Soon, the novice student will be noticeably progressing toward expert when asked about GMO labeling legislation. They may say, with this situation, I would suggest emphasizing the detrimental effects of states' mandate when it does not agree with original legislation. They no longer have to think in bits, petition the courts, have this defense, the judge is going to react in this way. It sort of then becomes an easily retrieved piece of network in the long-term memory. A comfortable metacognition process occurs. Declarative, procedural, and conditional knowledge is linked so strongly that the expert doesn't need to actively process each little step to meet an end. The Agricultural Law Novice podcast, using declarative, procedural, and conditional knowledge to take a novice to an expert. Thank you for listening.